Hi, everyone. Welcome to Empowered Astrology. I'm Christopher Mitchell, and I'm here with Tom Jacobs. And today we're going to be continuing our Astrological Basics series by talking about the inner planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So just to start us off, I wanted to dive in with looking at this category of bodies, the inner planets, or as they're also called, the personal planets. Tom, can you share what your take on this grouping of planets is?
Yeah. I mean, along with the lights, the sun and the moon are the luminaries, which we did cover in the last episode. I mean, for me, when I think inner planets or personal planets, I think of all five. But the lights, of course, do have a special place and emphasis. Yeah, with these three, they're the planets we live with every day. The influences, the parts of our psyche, who besides sun and moon, self and feeling or something like that, ego and emotions, beside those two that we are in touch with all the time. So they help define our personality. They're personal. They happen to be, they are close to the sun, closer than other planets as we go out in future episodes. And we're aware of their influences all the time. So Mercury function within a person is perception, thinking, processing information, learning, teaching, writing, speaking. All that stuff is Mercury, which of course, living life through, the lens of our left brain, quite often is a mercurial thing. So we're in touch with that all the time. And Venus is how we relate to other people. So all relationships have to do with Venus, and also our values and what we want to invest our energy, time, and attention into, which includes people and money and skills and all these kinds of things. And then Mars is what we desire, how we assert ourselves, and a good portion of the reality of physical living, like being in the body, and how that goes and how that unfolds. So they are really, again, aside from the sun and moon as daily influences, we're always in touch with these parts of ourselves.
Yeah, so they show up. They show up in almost everything we do.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of took a whizzing tour there of
Yeah.
of all three really quick, but like to take time to unpack each one a little more expansively. If we start with Mercury, how can we understand that planet and what it's about in us?
Yeah. Obviously, for any of us, we might very obviously understand, oh, yes, I listen to you and then I respond to you and talking and words and ideas. But I like to emphasize, so it's communication, but I like to emphasize the level of it that's about perception. And it's not about interpretation of things, but it's about what you perceive, what you see in front of you. Again, maybe not how you can create meaning out of it, that comes later, but observing things in front of you, your Mercury is doing all the time. And so different signs and houses have different experiences, but everybody's got this essentially, narrator that's observing, everything all the time in his or her life. So you are perceiving the world around you through your sensory organs. And so sometimes with Mercury, I'd say Mercury is less about, for example, touch, but touch as an exploratory thing, like, oh, what does this thing feel like? And you touch it, that's a mercurial data, you're gathering data. But also your sensory organs otherwise, your hearing, your sight, those are the center of mercurial experience. So you're taking this is the key point. You're taking information in from the world around you. Oh, my neighbors are cooking. Or, oh, there's a truck parked outside my window. The smell, right? You're orienting to the environment, to the real world around you. Oh, I can hear people singing down the street, or I hear kids playing in the hallway, whatever it is. You're gathering data about the world around you. And that's the center of Mercury. That's the core of it. And then, of course, teaching, writing, speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, and then depending on the disposition of one's Mercury, which we'll get into,
Yeah.
signs and houses and aspects, does that then changes how we receive information or how we process the information that we get?
Yes. And what we tend to be interested in. So all Mercury placements represent curiosity. As we go, I'm realizing I didn't cover all these other keywords because there's just so many potential. But one of them could also be curiosity. Like, why would you gather data? Why would you seek new information? You're curious, right? So all Mercuries are curious, and then in a house, what part of life or what arena of life experience is that activated in, especially or focused in? But then also the sign, how does it prefer to think? What is it interested in thinking? So as you add layers of analysis later, you're taking like this central core thing and then adding flavors to it. But every Mercury represents curiosity and information in and out, if that makes sense.
So tying it to this idea of like perception or of just raw data, right? Like I'm thinking of the image that's coming up for me is like a room for like a preschooler or something, like just full of all these like 100 different stuffed animals, right?
Yep.
And somebody walks into that room, and it's a lot of perception, it's a lot of data. Which stuffed animals are they going to look at or be drawn to? That's going to have something to do with their Mercury. Of the set of things that can be perceived,
Yeah.
what is somebody likely to notice? So that's one layer of the Mercury, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But then also somehow something to do, if I've got this right, something to do with as that thing is perceived. Let's say there's two different people and they both notice this rabbit stuffed animal, but if they have different Mercuries, they'll perceive that same thing differently.
Yeah, definitely. Or they're noticing it for different reasons. Yes.
This is feeling. I'm trying to see if I can get clear on this because it's still feeling a little. It's interestingly tricky with the nature of like these perception pathways and stuff to try and get a sense of like, are we saying that that Mercury is, because it's not the only thing that defines how we think about and experience the world, right? That also comes from layers of our conditioning or of our other planetary stuff. But Mercury seems like so. What is the role of Mercury insofar as like how we think about things?
Yeah. So let's say that one person notices this particular stuffed rabbit, and there's a reason that person notices it, and the other person also notices it but for a different reason. Well, maybe for one, this color is her favorite color. Or maybe the second person, that for the second person, maybe it reminds her of something that comforted her when she was a kid. Mm-hmm. So it could be different reasons, but they're noticing this. They're noticing something, and it could be different reasons, different, so to speak, colorings or lenses on that. But they're both noticing it, so they're both perceiving it, but it could be for different reasons, and that comes in other layers of understanding what the Mercury is about. Yeah.
And so simply keyword wise, it has to do with what we're curious about and how we think and how we perceive.
Yes, and how we communicate as well. Definitely how we communicate as well. And sometimes layers of how we learn. Like how we learn. Again, every Mercury is about learning, but they have different styles. And I just want to say one thing about that, just really briefly. It's when we think about like factory education, where some kids are seen to be slow or wrong, or they don't get it, but they're fine. They may have different styles of learning, where Mercury can help. Understanding a Mercury's, so to speak, situation. its disposition in the chart and different factors can help you understand how a person learns. And when I do tutoring, I try to pay attention to that to understand where the student is coming from, because there's certain ways I might naturally explain things that will not suit that person. But so I try to understand how that person's brain works, and is another way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really powerful technique. It's really powerful to meet someone in the way they learn.
So it can be like this gateway of how we and the world outside of us exchange information, what we take in and how we take it in, but then also how we can give out to others, and then it mixes with how they receive too.
Yes.
And so I'm getting, and this is why Mercury rules things like roadways and highways and freeways in astrological relationships, right? Because it's these pathways, these roads through which information is traveling into us, out of us, into another. And it has to go through these different tunnels or over these different bridges that have different clearances and different speed limits. And so somehow the information has to go through these different paths, and in doing so gets perceived differently by each of us. And Mercury is an umbrella over all of that.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I really like that. And that makes me think of this other little detail of my Mercury has its own groove or natural way of operating. When I do that, your Mercury will have its own way of being affected by my communication. And then you say, that makes me think of this. And then here we are actually doing it, like I'm meta doing it, right? And that is another mercurial thing. You are affected by what you learn and perceive and smell, for example. You are affected by it. You may have a response. So information in and out is another just umbrella thing to understand. Yeah.
So we're talking about perception, and we're talking about exchange of information, but then what about the internal thought process as well, just within our own selves? Because I think you'd also say, if I'm correct, that Mercury has to do with how we think. I guess maybe you were just saying that with because of the information we've taken in, because of our perceptions, we're geared to think a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're geared to think a certain way, to process a certain way, and to derive meaning or try to discern what's important in a certain way. And it's all of those things.
Through the lens of that Mercury, according to its experience and process and aspect and house and sign. Really interesting. And then I guess something I was hung up on for a moment was but there's other layers to us. We've got the moon and I was thinking what if there's something arising from our moon, but then we're thinking about that thing. So did it come from our moon or did it come from our Mercury? And if I'm right, I guess you'd say, well, we had the feeling from our moon and then we thought about it in our Mercury way.
I like that. Yes.
But it's always Mercury that's doing the thinking?
Yeah. Now, moon is also a processor, an emotional processor, but a data processor is Mercury.
So all data processing is a mercurial layer of our being.
Yes. The left brain version of that. Yes, data processing, yes.
Wordy, thoughty, thinky stuff.
Wordy, thoughty, thinky stuff, yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to quote you later. Wordy, thoughty, thinky.
You need the stuff part too.
Wordy, thoughty, thinky stuff, yeah.
For those who can't tell, we're recording while Mercury is doing something too, so we're in the mix of it right now. So that's thinking about the birth Mercury, the natal one. I think we've covered a lot of ways to think about that. What about when Mercury is moving around in transit? How does that differ from the birth placement?
So in any given moment, it's moving through a sign of the zodiac. So you think about a conversation arises for some reason through a sign, but new information comes to you, you may respond to it. Or questions arise, whether you bring them or they're brought to you. Or you learn something new and, oh, that's interesting, and it leads to learning four other things. That can all be understood through Mercury transits. Independent of how you're wired and your natal placement, the Mercury transits can, affect everybody in information flow and when certain kinds of information are highlighted or what may appeal to us. Well, sorry, the latter part, what may appeal to us, is about your natal Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
But Mercury in transit, and it can affect different things in your chart over time. It does affect different things in your chart, like activating aspects of your personality in different ways throughout the year. So in transit, it kind of brings new information, whether you were looking for it or not. So the natal placement is the part of your psyche. The personality function, information in and out, processing, awareness, observation, all that stuff. In transit, it's like bringing new information, new stimulation, new questions.
And always with our natal Mercury in mind, as that's such a funny sentence. Always with our natal Mercury in mind as being our but among the many things that our natural Mercury might perceive or think about, the transiting Mercury can then highlight at this time, this in particular is coming up in our perception.
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is does this transiting Mercury, would it ever give us something that we wouldn't perceive ourselves with just our own Mercury?
Yeah. We may not be drawn to certain kinds of questions or answers, but yes, transiting Mercury can bring stuff to us and expose us to new information.
Oh, and so that's how it can interact with our natural one, because we naturally are wired to think and notice certain things and process in certain ways.
Yes.
And then the transiting Mercury is like, and here's something that you maybe wouldn't usually notice,
right.
Or here's a way of processing that you wouldn't usually, that isn't as familiar to you, and like, let's throw that into the mix and see how your natal Mercury handles that.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We're always being invited. I mean, one way to think about a person in a human life is not that, well, we are born and then we grow up and then we have a mortgage, but to think about we're always changing over time.
Mm-hmm.
Human life can be thought of as an exercise in change. And so if we're willing to change, we may be willing to receive new perspectives, new information, and how that new information can change us, and then we may have a response. That change us idea I take from Steve Forrest, who is one of my teachers, or my main teacher. And that idea of like, it's not just that you had a new thought or a piece of information came to you, but it affected you. It somehow changed you. And then when you responded, things were obviously evolving in some way. Like change was obvious because you were changed by what you experienced or learned.
Mm-hmm.
So taking things in, being changed by them, and then turning around.
I'm seeing that interplay with the transits of how we have what our natal signature is, we have who we would be left alone in a vacuum, and then we have the changing situations and circumstances and people and triggers of life that are giving us a mix of things that we would naturally put on our plate and things that we would never put on our plate, and we're figuring out we're sorting through all that and evolving through it.
Yep. Good.
Cool. Well, so then I guess moving on to Venus, and looking into that function as well, what's the way into starting to think about Venus in ourselves and what it represents?
Yeah. So we typically think about we have a bunch of keywords for Venus that later we'll separate into kind of two layers or two tracks. Right now I'm going to do them all together. And I always think about your value system, what you value. And if that when I say stuff like that, I'm always like, do people think like that? Because it's just a thing that I think about, living according to one's values. And what it really looks like is, what do you find important enough to invest your time into? You know, the way you earn or save and or use money, does it make you like yourself? Because self-esteem is part of Venus as well. And then our relating style. Do we define ourselves based on how others treat us or don't treat us? So there's a whole kind of complex gob of things that look like relationships or money. It looks like these two different sides of it, but it is, that thing about how we define ourselves. If when I was young, everyone said to me, the sky's the limit and you're amazing. Well, I might believe that stuff about me, right? Similarly, if everyone told me you'll never amount to anything, well, I might believe that. Because we're social creatures, we take cues from others about ourselves and what we appear to be worth. But then the challenge is to develop self-worth and self-respect. I don't want to get too complex, but it is a really, I don't want to say like a tangled nest, but it's just really important when I talk about Venus to be really clear. It looks like it's about money, possessions, and relationships. But think about this. If you come to my house and you go through the garage and there are 10 obviously well-maintained, extremely expensive road racing bikes, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know Tom was into this. You can see what I spend energy and money on. Or, more likely, a garage full of like really expensive bass trombones and tubas. You'd say, oh, look, he's really into this. How much energy, time, money he's invested. And they're also shiny. He obviously is sitting there polishing them too, right? Investing energy. He values music or bicycling or whatever. Similarly, who I hang out with also tells you about my values. Do I hang out with people who insult me or are cruel or who kick puppies? Or people who are very intellectual? Or people who are very artsy? Like, who do I hang out with? That tells you what I value as well. So the core of it for me is my value system, what I truly find important. My relationships reflect some of that, as well as my possessions and what I put my energy and attention into. That's the core of it for me. I know that's got some layers in there.
Yeah, it's intricate, maybe not so much a tangled nest as it is these different facets or manifestations in life. And again, it's a personal planet, right? So it's in so much of how our experience is constructed, or how we create our experience, or who we are and how that's reflected in our experience, that the core, like you're saying, is what we value, and that can change over time. But it's always, and we always have the Venus that we have. But as we go through life, we refine and evolve what that. Well, maybe there's a good question, right? Like as we, when we're at some point we're valuing cotton candy and cartoons, and another point we're valuing like early dating, and at some point we're valuing stock portfolios or something. Like it does seem to change.
Yeah.
Is that through the same interplay we were talking about of Mercury, of just like going through lots of questions and lots of experiences and refining it?
Yeah, with the Mercury thing, it's like, do I like this material? Do I like thinking this way? Do I want to communicate and think about this? Do I want to learn about this? With Venus, it's and all these things are trial and error processes. With Venus, it's, what do I want to invest my time in? And then I start paying for a gym membership and I never go. Well, then I'm paying for something I don't use. The fact I don't go there reflects something about my values. So then I might say, I guess that's not correct. That's not the right thing for me. Or they're not the right kind of place. Maybe I just need to get out on a bicycle or go for a walk instead of joining a gym or whatever, or get some free weights for home instead of thinking I have to go to a gym or whatever. Um, Finding the right avenue for that, what you're investing in, what tools and resources you're employing, tools and resources also being related to Venus.
Hmm.
So, yeah, you learn over time, similarly with people and relationships. Well, I kept dating the same kind of person, and I realized, yeah, I just don't want that. So I said no, and I stopped it. I learned what I don't like, what doesn't suit my values.
Hmm. And then so doubling back there, the thing that relates to all these different areas of life that this personal planet connects into, the finances and relationships and dating and even things like aesthetics,
Yeah, yeah.
and how we decorate, what we wear, all of this is essentially connects into to our value system,
That's right.
and and that like we've just discussed, that value system does evolve through
Yes.
experience,
Hmm.
and refine itself through the questions of life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's always going to be our Venus. So while it's evolving, there's also something that's kind of staying. I don't want to say staying the same because I feel like that's not really right,
Hmm.
but we do always have, if it's a Sagittarius Venus, it's a Sagittarius Venus. If it's a Capricorn Venus, it's a Capricorn Venus. So what is it that what is it that remains even as we evolve it and change it? Because it will always be
Yeah.
disposed to something in that area, even if what in that area it's drawn to shifts over time, right?
Yeah. 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 So the trial and error process is good to remember. I'm going to find out if paying for this gym membership is the right thing. I'm going to find out. Or I'm going to find out if, you know, this kind of friendship is going to work for me, right? Or this person. But as we get into houses and signs later, we're going to explore how there is a vast archetypal terrain represented by each, a range of experiences, possible experiences, a range of expressions. Similarly with the planets too, but we're going to build kind of keyword buckets and then be able to pull them out and make sentences based on, how they're different from each other and like the right words in the right order to make meaning. But we have a certain field of experience, and given house and sign, there are certain things that appeal to that Venus and certain things that don't. Like my Venus is in Libra, and my Venus, my relating style appreciates kindness. If my Venus were in Capricorn, maybe it would appreciate efficiency. Venus in Virgo, efficiency. Venus in Capricorn, practicality. Venus in Scorpio, digging to tell the truth or deeply connecting. So the Venus is like wearing a costume. So there's a set range of things that may or may not appeal, and that as you change over time, you might upgrade how and why you do it.
We'll pull different things out of or be drawn to different things in the bucket, but
Yeah.
we're still fishing around in the same bucket.
Yes. Yeah, it's got a certain, not limit, but it's got a certain range of experiences and expressions that will appeal to it, given certain chart factors. And like Venus is always Venus, but Venus in Capricorn is different than Venus in Aquarius. So there's just archetypal expressions that are different, but it's all Venus. Like what makes me relax is kindness and generosity of spirit, Venus in Libra. What makes Venus in Scorpio relax is honesty. Like getting that subtext brought to the surface, and oh, thank God you said that because I was wondering what was going on. I could feel something. So when you learn more later about signs and houses, or some of you listen to this might have that background, it's always Venus. Um, what makes me feel accepted? How do I what role does kindness or generosity play in my life? Or where do I try to create balance but with other people? How might I people please? and then learn how later to have more self-respect and not do that. It's all Venus, but through different lenses.
What do I do with my time, my
Yes.
energy, my money?
Yes.
What do I do in relationship?
Yep.
What do I do? What do I fill my space with? What do I
Exactly.
acquire? What do I keep? What do I let go of?
That's right.
And yeah, like walking it back to a simple place, it's like that we all have a we like what we like, and it changes over time, but like
Yes.
we come in and you can see it from right on the get-go that, like, different color preferences, different, like, things that you do on the playground. Some people are over there, you know collecting clay nuggets out of the sandbox. Others are picking flowers, and others are using
Yeah.
the toys or something. And in some way, Venus is part of that,
Yeah.
of that disposition towards, if Mercury is what we notice and perceive and think about, then Venus is like is what we like and value. There's the
Yeah,
word.
and a lot of the stuff you're adding in points toward creativity, which we haven't even mentioned really. But it is also creative and artistic and seeking beauty or seeking lightness or something kind and generous and peaceful. I'm stuck on certain keywords right now, but yeah, what you're bringing in points also toward creativity. These people are gathering flowers. That's beautiful, and maybe they're going to make an arrangement. These other kids are like finding clay nuggets, and maybe they're going to try to build something later with those. So what you're getting at is bringing in the creativity aspect, which is super important with all Venus placements too.
You're giving me an idea for one more thing to talk about here before we change to
Yeah.
transits and then change to change planets. But
Yeah.
it's like, of course, like there's this feminine aspect to
Yeah.
Venus, right? And like that, even though we have different Venuses disposed in different ways, value different things, they're all, is it right to say that they're all geared towards wanting a harmonious, peaceful, positive, like balanced experience?
In theory, yes. Sometimes Venus, from a hurt place or imbalanced place, wants to manipulate and control to not feel vulnerable. So one ideal of Venus is sharing and back and forth. I give to you, you receive, and then you give to me, I receive, and we figure out how to do that. If it's, let's say that something is very imbalanced over a long term, a person might be inclined not to be open to receive, or might be inclined to try to, control another person is one of the possibilities. Like, if I perceive I'm never listened to, that might make me a more aggressive communicator, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Because you value being listened to, and then that Venus wants to be listened to, and so it tries to find a way to be listened to,
That's
and
it.
that can end up expressing unconsciously.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah.
But then when you peel back the hurt and you do some work around it and you do some healing, perhaps you'll find that the origin was, oh, I value being listened to, and you don't actually need that, those hurt manifestations of it. You can get
Yeah.
down and address the innocent core of it, and then find
Yeah.
and align your value system with situations in life where that can be expressed healthily.
Yeah. Yeah. Good points. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so then what about when it comes around in transit? Like,
Well, so let me say one thing about the feminine that you had
oh
brought
yeah,
up and
sure.
I didn't answer. Yeah. Independent of gender and, gender identity, the feminine represents a receptive attitude. Like the masculine, again, independent of gender and body parts and identity and all that stuff. Masculine energy does things no matter what person it's found in. Shapes, directs, does things. Feminine energy may receive or experience or witness, without doing. So Venus, the feminine part of Venus, can be in receiving from others, and then we can actually co-create these rhythms of care, or giving little gifties, or I don't know, like giving and receiving favors, helping each other. And so that receptivity is this feminine quality of it. We get, sometimes in our cultural conditioning over thousands of years, Venus has come to represent the beauty side of Venus, the attraction, the art thing, idealizing certain things we consider beautiful, including literal women and standards of beauty and all that stuff. That's obviously a more complex way to get into it, but that sense of figuring out what the feminine means to us, it can have to do with Venus as well. And I just thought of this example while you were talking. A couple weeks ago, my girlfriend and I kind of play sometimes like we're kids and we're kind of playful and open, until, I swear, I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to be very embarrassed about it. It's something I have to work on healing. She wanted to play patty cake, and I refused. So my 51-year-old girlfriend with the 49-year-old Tom, and I was sitting there being obstinate, and I wouldn't do it, and she was trying to figure out, because she felt playful. Well, it's my experience as a man of femininity. That's what girls did. Right? Boys don't do. And there was a little kid in me who was like, I don't want to be seen as a girl. So anyway, it can bring up stuff like that too. But the play and the sharing and the reflection back and forth, and, oh, Chris, did you know that, I really appreciate your intellect, blah, blah, blah. That's a reflection I give you. And you say, oh, Tom, I really like how all your shirts are dark gray. Whatever. We're exchanging compliments. That's Venus too. I'm sure you love that every one of my shirts is dark. Anyway, so the giving back and forth is a huge part of it, which requires the feminine energy of receptivity, openness.
And then I guess Venus, our natural natal Venus would then point to, it's kind of like love languages, right? Like, this is how I want to receive, and this is how I want to give. Exactly. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I think about Venus a lot. It's prominent in my chart, and I think about it a lot. But so it's hard to get a quick, easy answer about Venus out of me. But that's where I begin with it. Yeah. Then you want to move to transits, like what Venus transit.
And I'm also just thinking, like, 50 episodes down the line or something, we probably got to do one about like the collective. The collective evolving Venusian values. Just look at how this happens, because it's like it's interesting to think about how these get built up and like how these value systems evolve and change.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, so thinking about it in transit, as Venus moves through, around the chart, then we have, like we were saying, love languages, right? Like, we have our natural values, we have our natural. This is how I like to receive. And this is how I like to give. And then Venus, just like with the discussion we had with Mercury, it presents alternative possibilities of giving and receiving and values for us to learn from and compare to our own and evolve our own through the experience of.
Yeah. Like, what is time worth? What is money worth? And I don't mean to be a smart aleck when I say the following, but what are people for?
Mm-hmm. Transiting Venus
it's
asks
the same thing.
These kinds of questions.
Yeah. So Venus in transit, you might realize, oh, I'm paying for this thing. I don't want to invest any more money in that. Or, oh, this conversation or that friendship, I think I'm complete. Or, gosh, I think I'm complete with that friendship, but it's not a value judgment. It's because of what I was seeking from that other person. Now I understand I'm complete. So Venus can also be what we look for in other people and hope they provide. So in transit, it's giving you different ideas and options and possibilities, and you may change, or you will change over time, but you may notice yourself changing, and something about money and people, relationships evolves over time and changes, and you make different decisions as your values evolve.
Wow, they have lots there. Lots with. I'm surprised as we're getting into these, just how much is coming out of these personal planets. These inner planets. Um,
I mean, that's why I have had such a hard time conceiving of writing a basics book, for example, which is one of the ways this collaboration arose.
mhm.
Um, because the way you ask questions can pull out of me really nice explanations for things, and you're like, yeah, but you don't do basics, and I'm like, it's nothing's basic. I mean, everything. It's, you know what I mean. Like, as soon as I start looking at something, like, well, I don't want to add 3 hours of a tangent, but this is important anyway. So it's been hard for me to just do basics or think about something in rudimentary ways to introduce new audiences or new people, to bring them in. But I mean, we're going to do it here. We're doing it, but um, it everything has all these layers.
And this is just the first pass. Like I said, like 50 episodes down the line, like
I know.
we're gonna run into these things where it's like, where we peel these things apart even more, or look at one particular facet of them in more depth.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I still like the. I remember when we were talking about the idea of doing some kind of basics thing together. I kept joking with you that we should call it advanced basics.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. Yeah, because everything leads to 10 more places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so Venus in transit will ask you what you value, and even ask you to compare one thing you're holding on to you think is pretty swell, but then here's this other thing. Like, I'm thinking about, like, 11-year-olds in school who are crushing on each other and hanging out and holding hands or something. And one of them says to the other one day, I'm not really into this anymore. And the other person goes, why? Is there somebody else? and the first person goes, yeah, and I don't know. He just gives me what I need. And it's like that sense of, like, I'm looking for something. Well, different options may arise. Or, oh, I found a better gym to join. It's better for me and what I want from a gym. It's all those things of upgrading, changing. Yeah.
I'm thinking of this setup of like two elementary schoolers or something who are like, and it's like maybe one of them.
He just gives me what I need. Yeah, I don't know.
Or
he just fills something.
One of them breaks up with the other and is like, I just want to play Pokemon cards for a while,
Yeah,
It's
exactly. I'm really into this game. Yeah, exactly. What I value, what I want to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is too heavy. I just want to go play my card games. Yeah, exactly. This is too heavy.
so I guess, like, let me scoot us along into Mars and start to unpack the final of our. I guess it's not a trio so much as it's a 5-tuple, but like of personal planets here, and ask, what about this Mars part of us? Like, how can we start to frame up that conversation and understand what Mars represents in our chart?
Okay. So, desire and instinct and response and reactivity without thinking. So a part of you wants something, you haven't thought about it. A part of you doesn't want something and pushes something away, you haven't thought about it. So it's a very ideally embodied response to the physical world. I like to say, because I have a prominent Mars and I live with this all the time, and I've learned thank the Lords, I've learned some things about living with it, because Mars can be like a carbon monoxide alarm. Silent, the stimulus, the carbon monoxide gas, you can't smell it or you can't smell it or see anything. Right? It's invisible and odorless. So you have this alarm in your house where this alarm will go off. It might wake you up and you're startled, but you don't know what's happening. The other example is a dog in a neighbor's yard, a block away. That dog can see 6 blocks the other way, there's a delivery truck coming. The UPS man is on the way, or a woman. Well, that dog barks. You don't know why it's barking. It's responding to something in the environment that may be a threat. Now, So Mars is both self-assertion, desire, self-interested action, and responding to things you're not aware yet you're responding to. It's both. It's an embodied, visceral thing. I think a good way to understand it is really desire. But also understand there's a physical thing about what it might reject. Again, you haven't thought about it. It will reject something. The way that happens with Mars is irritability and agitation and anger. So you don't know why that dog is freaking out. You don't know. When you stick your head out the door, you see you see it a block away, and the dog's head is pointed the other way that you can't see, and you're like, oh, maybe there's something going on down the street. The dog's barking about that. So you don't know at first, but there's an agitation that is very obvious.
I guess that agitation, that energy that drives Mars, it can be aversive, like I don't want that, or I feel threatened by that, but it can also be an agitation, a stirring of desire of I do want that, and I'm going to get that.
Yeah, either way, yeah, and it can be uncomfortable in different, if we have like rhythm issues with it, or if we don't let ourselves want things because we don't want to be aggressive jerks, right? Or if we try to edit or limit that, it's a visceral, non-logical thing. It's our bodies want that. Like I don't know, whatever. You're walking down the street in some city you've never been in, and you're like, whoa, what is that smell? And somebody says, oh, it's a roasted whatever kind of nut, just go a block that way, the guy's over there. And you're like, and your body's like, I want that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or a person. Or, a feeling, an experience, or something. So it can be primal, and we have to learn how to ground it and manage it, but it doesn't deliberate. Venus will say, oh, I like these two things, and I'm going to think about which I like. Mars will just like one of them and want it. So it's very simplistic in a certain way. I don't want to say animalistic, but it can be. It's visceral and physical. Now, we don't live like animals and think of ourselves as animals, but when you want something, you can't reason it out with Mars. With Venus, like I was joking with my girlfriend, again, I have a prominent Venus, and I was joking with her because I had been, I don't know, I'd seen some car out in the world, and later I looked it up online and was looking at pictures, and like my Venus was, I just wanted that car because it was so beautiful. And so I was joking with her that while our cars are practical, I said to her, look, I don't know. Next car, Venus might make that decision. It's a beautiful, and I can go on and I can wax poetic for hours about this car, its design and the color and the whatever, because I'm into the beauty. But that's like, there's a reason in there. But when I smell roasted cashews, maybe I just want roasted. It's just my body's responding. It's very different. Anyway, just to contrast a little bit, because they both can be about desire, but Mars is like visceral and physical sometimes, raw sometimes.
I'm thinking of like this idea of like a yes/no response, like a.
Thank you. Good. That's where we should go. Yes. Good. Thank you.
And in that, I think it connects to. You get ideas around Mars, as well as like how we attack or defend or act or resist, right?
Yes. Act and resist is a really good framework, yeah.
Because it doesn't necessarily need to be attacking and defending. That comes from a particular, I guess, level of consciousness where one thinks they need to attack or defend, but there is within us this thing about acting and resisting, wanting and not wanting, and things like attack might rise out of that, but really it boils down to this want, not want, kind of caveman sort of binary thing, right?
Yes, definitely, yeah. And that can be anything or people or situations, but yeah, and that assertion, like, I really want that thing, but it's the last one in the dish. Does anybody else mind? There's like the civilizing of Mars. The first part of it is, I really want the last, I don't know, stuffed pepper, potluck, whatever. But you don't want to be an aggressive jerk, so you say, So you bring in Venus to help the Mars, but it's the wanting. Yes. And it's also in, and I think that function of wanting or acting versus resisting, we can edit ourselves, because if we've ever been burned by negative Mars or anger and arguments, we don't want conflict, we'll resist being too assertive later because we're trying to avoid, instigating something negative or painful. In my work, as some of you will know, and Chris, intimately well from studying with me, I focus a lot on healing emotional dynamics, and we never want to become the kind of person who hurt us. So people who have been through Mars crap don't want to do Mars because it may seem dangerous or to risk conflict. But the basic idea to honor is your body wants certain things and doesn't want other things. And how can you flow with that? And how can you, not edit yourself too much?
There's a couple different places I feel like are important to go here on this Mars subject, but I think I want to, before we proceed deeper into the Mars discussion, to say we've talked a lot about the idea of Mars and how this function feels and lives in us, and then to talk about, okay, but how is that different for each of us? Like, how does that show up differently in each of our lives? And then that's where we point to our birth chart and to our particular Mars, right?
Right. Think about Mars wearing a different costume or having different motivations. And but it's all the same yes-no response that you pointed out. And that's where I work on it with people. Whatever the life issue is that relates to Mars, I say it may be a big thing, but focus on saying yes to what you like and no thank you to what you don't like. And that's learning to exercise a muscle where you have the confidence and you're allowed to say yes and no. But then, it's filtered in different ways through different people. Like one person's yes-no response might be through a house or sign with added deliberation. Another person's might be just completely instinctive. Another person's might run through an emotional thing or an intellectual thing as they say yes and no. So different filters, but it's a part of the person that says, I want that, I don't want that. And that's a simple way to keep it clear.
And then by house sign and aspect and placement, where we can start to describe, like, well, what kinds of things does this person want and not want?
Right. Exactly. But by itself, Mars is the desire nature. And then these layers
and not just what do they want and not want, but how do they want it, or how do they go about pursuing the things that they want, or how do they go about saying no to the things they don't want?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And this is where we get into you just said something about desire in there somewhere, and I was thinking to connect this into talking about how Mars is related to appetites and to sexuality, food, basic instinct, and I guess, how do we connect those kinds of body level or instinctual things into the Mars conversation?
Yeah. I think your body wants certain kinds of experiences and doesn't want other kinds of experiences, in that simplistic black and white way of thinking about it. And then, but it's all those body-centered experiences, like how your clothes feel, and sexuality, and appetites that you're talking about, all the physical things. And this is where things just get complex. But yes, it is also about sexuality, saying yes and no, and appetites. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer more without going on 10-minute tangents.
We got asteroids to cover and
so
all kinds of other things to get into too.
There's so much, yeah.
I think I just wanted to make sure I put that piece in there, like I vocalized that angle of the archetype that it can have to do with that physicality stuff,
Yeah. What we could also think about as passion. And what lights your fire? Not necessarily only sexually, though we might use that idea in that convo, but what excites you? What gets you going? What activates fire in you? What makes you want to leap out of your chair and have an experience or pursue something? It's part of that desire nature. It can be a quick and strong fire response, whether defensive or desire-based, fire, either way, towards something. And so another way to think about Mars is it starts things but doesn't finish them, because the spark happens and then it might pass. And so to understand your Mars, think about what inspires you, what lights a fire in your belly or fire in your loins, either way. Like that inspiration is part of Mars too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And thankfully we have other parts of ourselves that we can then pass the things on to after they're sparked. You know, we can bring our Venus in, we can bring our Mercury in, we can bring some of these other planets we haven't talked about in, and carry things in different ways.
Because Mars doesn't think about consequences, and Mars may not be interested in how many toes it steps on. It wants what it wants. I'm not trying to paint a picture of like out of control craziness, but it can be gruff and not sensitive because it wants what it wants.
And we don't want to make, and I don't know if maybe it's fair to say that this part of ourselves is one that is uniquely or more so twisted up or hampered or questioned in our modern world, but it is like to say, okay, we don't need to make this part of ourselves wrong, and yet there's a more to us than just it. So keeping it in a healthy place, but a lot of us probably, but to delineate and get clear on, okay, this is what Mars is, and then to use it in healthy ways, so it's not a part of ourselves that's shut off or repressed or stifled
or shamed, automatically stifled. Shamed, stifled. Yep. Good, thank you. I like all.
And then bringing it around to the what do I say yes to and what do I say no to piece, I suppose, would that be your invitation as to how to use Mars in a healthy way? Is to,
I think so, and also like you're saying, I'm gonna paraphrase something you were just saying. I would say don't make yourself wrong for wanting something, but don't let Mars exist in a vacuum where it just takes whatever. Like, it's not wrong to want something or to be passionately inspired or to whatever, but that's not the only part of your chart, and so other parts it's good to have Mars grounded. But Mars will tell you what you want. Even if you don't act on it all the time, it will always tell you what you want and don't want. What feels yummy versus what feels toxic or a threat or something like that.
And that's different depending on our different Marses. But the healthy use of anyone's Mars is to learn how to say yes and no to things and use that Mars in an integrated way.
So we avoid what we would call passive aggression. I have this example I use. Chris, you probably heard it a dozen times. But years ago, just two back-to-back girlfriends over a couple years, both liked going to like French bistro restaurants. They just liked it. And I never thought about it until we would go in these two successive relationships until we'd be there. The service was slow and terrible. I didn't like anything on the menu. I just, not into whatever, like the casual light French bistro fare. And you could never get the check until you'd like grown a gray beard. It took forever. And you're like, wave it. Anyway. So my Mars, what I would do, instead of saying, oh, girlfriend, in two successive relationships, I don't like going to these places. Half the time, what if we go to these other kinds of places? Or let's work it out. Well, I wouldn't do that. So what would happen? I would sigh and look at my watch. Same thing with movie choices with my present girlfriend. If we'd make movie night or whatever, and I wouldn't like what she would choose, but I didn't realize it till I'm sitting there not liking it and sighing. So we want Mars to be assertive, not overly aggressive or passive aggressive. We don't have to be aggressive, but to learn how to be assertive is really the point. And that's where I say yes please and no thank you to what is appropriate.
And we all have a Mars, and they're different, just like we all have different Venuses that like different things, that have different values. But we all have a
Yes,
Mars, and this part of us like needs to be able to do that to say like,
that's right.
man, I don't think I'm gonna like this movie, or I don't think I want to
Yeah,
watch this right now, or I really do
yeah.
want this, like.
And at times we negotiate, but at times you just say, nope, don't want that. And you don't make anyone else wrong for wanting it.
Mhm.
You just recognize that, yes, you just recognize where you are with something.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's important to bring in like the other side of we were talking about the feminine with Venus, and
Yeah.
then Mars is often represented as the masculine, and comes into
Right.
conversation paired with Venus
Yes.
so much. Is there some stuff you can say about that?
Yeah, that's actually really great because Venus does not have the whole story and Mars does not have the whole story. Well, okay, that's just kind of a headline that I want to build on in a minute. First of all, is Mars being associated with the masculine? Sure, of course it is. But again, independent of body type or gender identity or sexual orientation, masculine energy does, while feminine energy is. And so the stereotypes of feminine and masculine, yeah, it gets applied. But I'm somebody who's more or less balanced between masculine and feminine. Some people see me as very masculine, and some people see me as very feminine. But I'm both. I'm strongly both, in different rhythms and different experiences. I'm very receptive and open, and I'm the best listener you've ever met. But I'm also, nope, do not want the French bistro food, whatever. I'm also like very clear about what I don't want. And sometimes it's surprising to me, different people perceive me in different ways, but I'm always like what I am. So I confound people because people expect a human to be more one than the other. And so anyway, I just live this all the time. And people misunderstanding me and projecting on me or something like that. Like girlfriends in the past thinking I must be gay when I'm not. It's just that I have different rhythms, right? So Mars doesn't have the whole answer. What you want isn't everything. But also adapting to what others want and making them happy, Venus, isn't the whole answer either. So what I like to think about is your Mars, be clear about what you do and don't want. But don't make other people wrong if they're in a different scenario, right? Then bring in the Venus of learning to dialogue so both people can be happy. Find a bridge, but don't ignore that you don't want to watch movies where things blow up. And I don't want to watch movies where a confused 12-year-old doesn't know about the sexuality and goes through this coming of age thing. I just don't want to watch that movie. And that's where I was with my partner. She loves these independent coming of age quirky movies and with a self-discovery theme, and I'm like, I've already done that. I'm okay. I'm okay. But she doesn't want to watch certain things. So I want her to be clear, yes to this, no to those two things, and I'll do the same, and then we work together to find Venus finds common ground. But let's honor the Mars, yes, I like this, no, I don't like that, in everybody. And it is possible, and it happens all over the globe every day, if we don't get too stuck in the stereotypes of man equals Mars, woman equals Venus. Like, if we don't get stuck in the stereotypes, then we can dialogue together and recognize, yeah, what would you like to do? Okay, well, I don't want to do that. Well, what else do you like to do? And you give me two more things, and I'm like, you know what? I love those things. We find a way to work it out together. That's the healthy version of being a person, is Mars and Venus together. I think. And independent, but I think that works for sexuality as well as movie choices and what bistro you go to. I think it works for everything.
I feel like there's a Venn diagram there too, and it's like you do that work
Yep.
of finding out what you can do together, and then you also can both watch the movies that don't fit in that middle zone on your own time separately as well.
Exactly. So you don't deny what you love, and I don't deny what I love, but we find a path together. Bridge building.
And celebrate
is a
and
Venus
connect
thing.
over what we love together, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's great.
That's right.
And then I feel like we also were touching on there on just some of these conversations about like the collective connotations around, like we all have every individual has a Mars and a Venus, masculine and feminine energy, and as you were saying, with some of the ways that you've been perceived based on your expression, that just butts up against cultural expectations or conditioning around what about gender and I guess that's the right word, right? Gender energy, and I think we're all kind of, it's a totally different discussion, but we're doing that work of getting clear on that kind of stuff over time too.
Yeah. I think the way you're wired, the way I'm wired, we'll naturally get there. We'll talk about that. Just because we would go, those would be like the 10, 12-minute tangents. We're both on that groove. So, yeah, we'll get there. But yes, it's
Okay. Well,
I'm trying to hold back because you and I have so many things to share about that, all that stuff. And there's so many different.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. So we do Mars in transit?
One more Mars particular, and then Mars in transit.
Please.
And I think that it might be good to distinguish, because some of the keywords for Mars there's embodiment, there's vitality, there's physicality, action, right? Vitality in particular, there is a vitalistic element to Mars, but there's also some of those same keywords, or at least there's also an energetic vitality associated with the sun, and I want to distinguish what the life energy and embodiment of the sun, how it differs from that of Mars.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So the vitality of the sun has to do with the entirety of your life. The vitality of Mars is moving temporarily, sweating, strengthening yourself. We didn't even talk about sports and athletics with Mars, but of course that's part of it too. Sexuality, athletics, sports, all those physical things. But the sun vitality is, the sun needs to be invested in as the decision maker. Like I think I mentioned in that episode, the idea of, like, in your head, there's a meeting going on. All these different planets have different opinions and voices and agendas and needs and expectations. The sun should be the final decision maker. I just listen to these 10 opinions or 8 opinions, and then the sun needs to make a decision. So the sun's vitality has to do with a coherent sense of self. That we have a direction, right? The Mars thing is physical vitality, and it can affect the sun's physical vitality too. But I just parse it out a little differently. Where, let's say, I'm reminded after a few months, oh my God, it feels so good to sweat. That's the Mars. But then incorporating activity into my life that helps me sweat is the sun. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking of, because we had this discussion around the sun about like how can things like fatigue or like a dimness come in, and it can be, we're not, if you're not living the kind of the creative fuel of your sun, that you might experience a kind of lethargy or dimness, or just not feeling like your brightness, your fuel is getting to shine out and radiate. Whereas with the Mars, so that's like if you're not kind of being who you are with the sun, then vital expression is impeded. And with Mars, it's more if you're not owning your yeses and you're not owning your nos and you're not trusting your strength, then a different kind of physical inhibition can come in there.
Yes. I don't trust my body, or I don't feel safe in my body with Mars, but a coherent sense of self with the sun. And there is overlap with the physical stuff, but the Mars is just one part of the psyche. And the sun is the part managing all the parts of the psyche.
Another future episode, physical food, exercise stuff, how planets can get twisted up and expressed in different ways. But okay, so I think that is a pretty well encompassing intro to Mars, and let's wrap up with talking about how it shows up in transits.
Okay, so it can set you off, your desire nature or your defensive nature, or both. things come to you in the world. Remember, transits are where life brings us opportunities or asks us questions, and we're challenged to respond. Um, and things to say yes and no to would be the broadest category. Like things to say yes and no to. Somebody says, "Oh, would you like to do this?" And you're like, "No, thank you." It's like, there, you answered it. You know what I mean? It's like it can be very black and white in that way. Um, if you find yourself always saying yes, please to things, check that, get grounded. If you're always saying no to things, check that and get grounded too. Because there's a variety of experiences for any human, but we can get in ruts and we can not be open. But like, for example, that image of like being in a city you've never been in before and you smell something and you're like, what is that? And your body, something wakes up when you smell it. And then if you were to walk that block and get a whatever cashews thing, and then you eat them and you're like, I will never, like, not to be too melodramatic, but you realize I will never be the same. This is such an amazing physical experience. Something in your body can wake up. So there's like a Mars thing that came to you that activated your desire. Similarly, things to say no to, same exact thing. And it can be people and situations that pull out your defensive response or that are defensive. Or people or situations that want something from you, or again, pull out your desire nature. Either way.
A set of opportunities or possibilities presents, and maybe your Mars gets to, flex in its healthy muscles, because it's like all of a sudden it's lit up by some stuff and wants some things.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a more frictitious transit or something that happens, and instead you're looking at like, why wouldn't I say yes and no, or
right. Or even conflict coming to you, or somebody's strong will or strong desire can come and interface with you, and you figure out if you're going to dance together or if it's a threat or not. Yeah, exactly. It's all that.
How do I respond to conflict?
Exactly.
Does my dog go off, or can I be clear within it? Right? Like,
I was going to make the joke when you were talking earlier, and then your Mars, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to the neighbor's yard and start barking and screaming because I feel good doing, that sense of like, I'm the dog now. Like, there's a truck, Yeah, it feels good. You find out things feel good is a major possibility.
I was thinking with the dog that like the dog barks no when it hears the mailman coming or something, but maybe it barks like yeah when like the milk guy is coming down the street, because the milk guy always gives him a saucer of milk.
Exactly.
Either way, he's there barking.
Exactly. Yes, yeah. And for us to learn the energetic difference is really important, because if we have unchecked responses, it's just really good to be aware of those energies. Is something really a threat? And maybe it isn't, but we have a defensive response.
I feel like this is really a good thing to end on it and to put into the conversation too, of like, again, being grounded or having a practice of noticing the stirrings of energy and emotion within the self, because like, what is this wanting or what is this agitation? Sometimes we can get to the place where we're not, even if the dog is barking to its face off, we just we've forgotten what the feeling of that is or what it means, and to refamiliarize ourselves with the emotions and the signals of that Mars, of those alarms, and learn to listen to them at subtler and subtler levels, so it doesn't have to be a blaring, circling siren, fire alarm before we're paying attention to our yeses and our nos.
Exactly, yeah. And extending that with anger, you can even, some people are quick to anger, have responses with anger. They may judge or shame or try to hide or edit. But I've gotten to the place where, with my partner, where she might, it's very rare because we get along really well, but she might say something that kind of pushes a button. And I'm able to not get angry, but tell her, look, anger is starting to come up. Maybe we can talk about this again in a couple hours. Meaning I have the feeling, but I'm not reacting. So we can get there with even anger stuff that we might perceive we don't have control over. That's why I'm always harping on grounding. but I've just had that experience, which feels like evolution for me. Instead of just like, what's going on? I'm agitated. I'm angry. Something feels toxic. I'm able to view the energy shifting and really be on top of it more. So I'm not, you know, one way to say it is I may have had anger issues in the past, and it's much less because I listen to my body, and I've watched those changes, those reactions. Yeah, yeah,
Well, I feel like this was really good. That I feel like what's coming to me is that we've defined a very, very small swath of the universe, but
yeah, yep,
but a decent size of our own personal lives, swath of our own personal lives.
yeah, definitely,
And
definitely.
yeah, so thank you for tuning in and playing with us. And we'll be back to start talking about some of the outer planets in the next episode. And yeah, have a good
Thanks,
one. Thanks,
Chris.
Tom. This is fun.
Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
peace.